Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving deep into one of the most tense and dramatic maritime developments unfolding in Northern Europe. The Baltic Sea crisis. A shocking move by Denmark has sent shockwaves through Moscow and across Europe. The Danish government has reportedly taken firm action to block the passage of Russian naval vessels through the Baltic Sea, sparking outrage in the Kremlin and raising questions about what comes next for regional stability. This situation isn't just a simple naval standoff. It's a geopolitical earthquake that could redefine the future of Baltic and European security for years to come. The Baltic Sea has always been more than just a body of water separating Scandinavia from Eastern Europe. It's a strategic lifeline for Russia's access to the Atlantic, a critical trade route for energy and goods, and now a potential flashpoint for a new Cold War-style confrontation. Denmark's decision to tighten control over its maritime zones is not only about sovereignty, it's about sending a clear message to Moscow. The Baltic Sea is no longer Russia's playground. Russia has long used the Baltic Sea for both military and economic leverage. Its Baltic fleet, stationed in Kaliningrad, has been a cornerstone of Moscow's military projection in the region. But now, with Denmark's assertive move, the fleet faces severe limitations. Reports suggest that Copenhagen, backed by NATO allies, has imposed stricter maritime regulations under the guise of security measures, effectively limiting Russian warships' access through the Danish Straits, the narrow passages connecting the Baltic Sea to the North Sea. These straits are the only gateways for Russia's Baltic fleet to reach open waters. By controlling them, Denmark holds a powerful geopolitical lever. From Russia's perspective, this is nothing short of a provocation. Moscow claims that Denmark's actions violate international maritime law and threaten freedom of navigation. The Kremlin has accused Copenhagen of acting under NATO's influence to isolate Russia and undermine its regional presence. Yet, Denmark argues it is only exercising its sovereign rights and protecting itself and its neighbors from potential threats, especially amid growing Russian aggression in Eastern Europe. The tension did not appear overnight. For months, NATO has increased surveillance and military activity in the Baltic region. Exercises involving U.S., British, and Scandinavian forces have become frequent, while Russia continues to deploy advanced weaponry in Kaliningrad, including anti-ship missiles and air defense systems. Denmark's move to block or restrict Russian passage fits into a broader pattern of NATO deterrence. The message is simple. The Baltic Sea is not a safe zone for Moscow's military maneuvers anymore. To understand why Denmark's action is so significant, we have to look at geography. The Danish Straits, comprising the Øresund, the Great Belt, and the Little Belt, are narrow choke points that all vessels from the Baltic must pass through to reach the Atlantic Ocean. This makes Denmark's position uniquely powerful. Controlling these waters means having a say over who enters or leaves the Baltic. During the Cold War, these routes were carefully monitored, but they remained open under international agreements. Now, with Russia's invasion of Ukraine and its increasingly aggressive behavior in the Baltic, Denmark is reevaluating those old arrangements. Behind closed doors, European diplomats say this move wasn't spontaneous. It was carefully coordinated with NATO allies, particularly the United States and the United Kingdom. The West sees the Baltic as the next potential theater of conflict if Moscow attempts to expand its influence westward. Denmark's proactive defense posture, therefore, isn't just about national interest, it's about collective security. Russian media has reacted furiously, calling Denmark's decision an act of maritime terrorism and accusing the West of trying to choke Russia's naval power. Kremlin spokespersons warned of serious consequences if the blockade or restrictions remain in place. Analysts in Moscow suggests that Russia might respond by deploying additional submarines or even testing NATO's resolve through naval provocations. But Denmark seems undeterred. The Danish Defense Ministry has increased its naval patrols, deployed surveillance drones, and reinforced radar coverage across the straits. Meanwhile, NATO is watching closely. The alliance sees Denmark as a critical player in the northern flank defense strategy. With Finland and Sweden now part of NATO, the Baltic region is almost entirely encircled by alliance members, leaving Russia's Kaliningrad as its only outpost. This strategic isolation is what Moscow fears most. Denmark's decision amplifies that isolation by physically restricting Russian mobility. European analysts argue that Denmark's move might be a response to recent Russian activities near its waters, including suspected sabotage operations and unauthorized reconnaissance missions. Several incidents over the past year involved unidentified underwater drones and close encounters between Danish patrols and Russian vessels. These raised alarms in Copenhagen about potential hybrid threats, covert operations designed to intimidate or destabilize NATO countries without open warfare. By blocking the Russian fleet's passage, Denmark is signaling that it won't tolerate such intimidation. It's a demonstration of deterrence, an attempt to show that small nations, backed by alliances, can stand up to larger powers. The symbolic value of this action is immense. It sends a message not only to Moscow, but also to other NATO members that unity and readiness are essential in this new era of confrontation. But the risks are equally high. Blocking Russian naval access could escalate into a larger conflict. Moscow might respond with countermeasures such as declaring new maritime zones, conducting aggressive naval exercises near Danish waters, or even interfering with commercial shipping routes. Such actions could disrupt global trade and energy supplies, further destabilizing Europe's economy. In the background, the European Union is also taking sides. Brussels has expressed strong support for Denmark's right to control its waters while calling for de-escalation. Yet, behind diplomatic language lies a firm recognition that Europe cannot afford to appear weak. The Baltic Sea has become a front line between democratic Europe and an increasingly authoritarian Russia. This situation also has implications for global trade. The Baltic Sea is a critical export route for Russian oil, gas, and goods. Any restriction could severely impact Moscow's revenues, already strained by Western sanctions. It could also push Russia to seek alternative routes through the Arctic or Asia, which are more expensive and logistically challenging. Experts note that this crisis might push Russia to double down on its Arctic ambitions, where it has been expanding its military presence and developing new ports. But in the short term, the blockade or restriction imposed by Denmark is a serious blow to Russia's naval freedom. It limits Moscow's ability to project power, conduct exercises, and maintain supply lines for its Baltic fleet. Inside Denmark, the government's decision has received mixed reactions. Some political figures support the move as a necessary step to protect national security. Others worry that it could provoke retaliation and endanger Danish shipping or energy infrastructure. The Danish public, however, largely supports a firm stance against Russia, especially after witnessing the invasion of Ukraine and recent cyber attacks across Europe, attributed to Russian actors. Internationally, Denmark's boldness is earning respect. Smaller NATO countries like Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania view Copenhagen's actions as a model of strength. They see it as a reassurance that even small nations can play decisive roles in collective defense. Meanwhile, Western intelligence agencies continue monitoring Russian reactions. Aware that the Kremlin might test the limits of NATO's patience, Moscow, for its part, is already exploring ways to circumvent the situation. Satellite images reportedly show increased Russian naval activity within the Baltic, possibly preparing for exercises meant to challenge the Danish decision. Russian state media is portraying Denmark as a puppet of NATO, claiming the West is trying to strangle Russia economically and militarily. But behind these narratives lies an uncomfortable truth for Moscow. The Baltic Sea, once a space for Russian dominance, is slipping from its control. This growing isolation has deeper consequences. Kaliningrad, Russia's heavily militarized enclave, now looks increasingly vulnerable. Surrounded by NATO members and cut off by restricted waterways, its logistical sustainability becomes questionable. Denmark's move could make it harder for Russia to resupply or rotate its forces in the region without risking confrontation. The crisis is also testing Europe's diplomatic endurance. While NATO remains united in its deterrence strategy, some European nations still hope for dialogue with Russia to prevent escalation. However, with each new provocation or military maneuver, those hopes fade further. From a strategic viewpoint, Denmark's action is a turning point. It marks a shift from reactive to preventive defense, a strategy that doesn't wait for aggression but acts early to minimize risk. For years, smaller European states depended on NATO's umbrella for protection. Now they're taking the initiative, shaping the security landscape themselves. The broader implication is clear. The Baltic Sea is no longer a gray zone. It's becoming a fortress of NATO control. Russia's access, influence, and naval power in the region are shrinking rapidly. And as Denmark stands firm, other nations are watching how Moscow will respond. Will it retaliate militarily, or will it test the waters diplomatically, hoping to exploit divisions within NATO? Either way, the stakes are high. A single naval encounter gone wrong could spiral into a full-blown crisis. That's why NATO navies remain on alert, conducting joint patrols and communication drills to prevent misunderstandings. The alliance knows that Russia often uses confusion and provocation as tools of warfare. Denmark's firmness aims to counter exactly that clarity through strength. As this Baltic Sea standoff unfolds, one thing becomes evident. The balance of power in Northern Europe is shifting. The era when Moscow could freely move its warships through the Baltic appears to be ending. Denmark, through decisive action, has asserted not just its sovereignty, but also the collective resolve of NATO's northern flank. In the months to come, all eyes will remain on the Danish Straits. They've become more than maritime corridors. They're now symbols of resistance, determination, and the fragile peace holding Europe together. Every ship that passes, or fails to pass, through them will tell a story about power, diplomacy, and survival in an increasingly divided world. For now, Denmark's stand against the Russian fleet marks a defining moment in European history. It's a reminder that geography, courage, and unity can still shape the course of global events. Whether this act leads to peace through strength or provokes new conflict will depend on the next moves from Moscow and the West. But one thing is certain.